So one day, Pythagoras is telling his followers, you guys know how last week I invented that math thing that's just to torture high school students? And his followers are like, yeah, I remember that. That was dope. And Pythagoras is like, well, now I figured out how acoustics works. Pitch and rhythm are basically the same thing. Oh, and intervals can be made using ratios. A little while later, this guy named Cleonidas comes along. He noted that within the diatonic genus, the three main consonances of a perfect octave, a perfect fifth, and a perfect fourth can be divided up into tones and semitones in a limited number of ways. He called this a species. To review, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Wait, I feel like I'm off subject. Then the church starts singing all of these different songs during their services. And they're like, you know what would make this even better? If we had a highly detailed schedule of what we sing for every single service. Oh, and perhaps a meticulous list of colors we should use and when.
On Wednesdays, we wear pink.
We have all of these chants now. They come from all sorts of different sources, but along comes Pope Gregory and he takes credit for all of them. What a jerk! How he managed to do this, I'll never know. The chants weren't even codified for 2 centuries after he was dead. Oh look! We just invented neumes! Good news everyone, we can use accidentals now. Oh, sorry, just B flat. Now that we have all of these scales and notes and modes and such, we should probably come up with a system for naming them. Enter Guido. He comes up with a system of syllables for naming notes, and he comes up with this awesome hand thing, and he once claimed that he could train a perfect singer in about a year. Maybe 2. Then the church got together and they were like, we need to have mass. So they decide to have mass every Sunday. But maybe some places will have it every day, and maybe if it's a really important day, then we'll have it more than once a day. Wow. The church has a lot of mass. Thanks, Higgs boson particle! Then Hildegard of Bingen shows up in Germany in the late 11th century. She starts writing all of this important stuff, and a lot of it's music. Her musical drama, Ordo Virtutum, even won the 1151 Tony Award for Best Musical. Good for her. #feminism. Pope Benedict XVI is so impressed that he makes her a doctor of the church. So now Hildegard can actually take the church's blood pressure and write it prescriptions and such. She's basically the 11th century version of a pop star. Oh look! France has troubadours now. No! Speaking of France, these guys who worked at the Church of Notre Dame. No, not that Notre Dame, this Notre Dame. They wrote some cool music, but their football team never won a game. They were like, you know what would be better than just everyone singing the melody all the time? Polyphony. Leonin, who is described by Wikipedia as probably French, wrote the great book of Organum, where he proves to the world that he is in fact the greatest composer of organum. Periton comes along and he's like, what Leonin did was pretty cool, but I could totally make it better. Good for him, the United States Copyright Office wasn't around until 1923. According to this dude named Anonymous 4, and I quote, Periton made very many better clausulae. Franco of Cologne was the best smelling music theorist of the 13th century. Now we have madrigals. Now I know what you're thinking. You've confused the 14th century madrigal with the 16th century madrigal. Completely different stuff. The Catholic Church is still hanging out and having mass. Classic Catholic Church, am I right? Machaut writes a mass called the Notre Dame Mass. No, not that Notre Dame, this Notre Dame. Try to keep up. This was one of the first times that a composer took the Mass Ordinary and made it one cohesive unit rather than individual movements. He won the Grammy Award that year for Best Concept Album. Oh, and instruments. We have those. It's the Renaissance, of course we have those. But we classify them by how loud they are. We've got portative organs and recorders and lutes and crumhorns and hurdy-gurdies. Oh, and also sackbuts. Here's an angel playing one. And now that it's the Renaissance, we can argue about things like how to tune our thirds. They would have done that in the Middle Ages, but they were way too busy surviving to worry about playing in tune. Now we have all of these different temperaments. One is just, one is mean, and one is Pythagorean. If we play in a just temperament, we actually can't play with all of the keys being in tune. So we have to have a lot of different instruments that are tuned to play in those different keys. Chromaticism is sort of a thing now, and the printing press made music notation much easier. So these Franco-Flemish composers come along from Franco-Flemia? No, that can't be right. Okay, so they were actually from the Netherlands. They're doing all of this crazy stuff. They're writing isorhythmic motets. They're using Hackett. They're using hemiola, which sounds like a rare blood disease, but it's not. Ockeghem starts doing this thing called a mensuration canon. Josquin likes to wear comedically oversized hats. Obrecht is still suffering from a bad haircut. These guys are a hoot and a half. The Catholic Church is over there still having more and more mass. Well, Martin Luther comes along and he's like, well, why can't we sing in church? And the Pope is like, well, we have paid musicians that can do that way better than you. And so Martin Luther leaves the Catholic Church and starts his own church where the congregation can sing together. Okay, so there may have been 94 other reasons too. Palestrina is so Catholic that to prove how Catholic he really is, he writes a mass to Pope Marcellus. Gesualdo was one of the most influential composers of the Italian Renaissance. He probably had a mental illness that included fits of rage. He wrote madrigals that were particularly chromatic for the time. He brutally murdered his wife and her lover.
Yeah, I stabbed a man in the heart.
He wrote many sacred and secular pieces. Igor Stravinsky was a big fan of his treatment of harmony. He married a second wife and treated her better. While he abused her, there's no record of him killing her. Now, madrigals. No, not those 14th century madrigals, 16th century madrigals. These were secular songs that were written to Italian poetry that really explored the emotion of the text. Also, since printing music has become a thing now, people can just buy the sheet music and sing along with their friends. Perhaps more accurately, they got it for free using the 16th century version of LimeWire. Monteverdi did a lot to get us towards the tonal system, that dominant tonic motion that we just can't seem to get enough of. He was basically the 16th century king of pop. Then everyone gets together and decides they should start singing everything. They call it an opera. And when I say everything, I mean everything. They sing lines that don't even need to be sung. Lines like, "You should wear the green shirt." There's no reason to sing that. Just say it. Heinrich Schütz is also a thing. He wrote some music. More importantly, he's the composer whose name sounds most like a sneeze. Welcome to the Baroque period. Please refrain from using puns.
Greendale's music department is flat Baroque.
What did I just say? Anyway, the music becomes increasingly ornamental. Vivaldi writes all of these concertos for church festivals. They're like super new and fresh. And who needs a through-composed piece when we've got all of these ritornellos? Vivaldi was basically writing hooks for 18th century pop songs. Music gets incredibly complex at this point. They wrote this thing called a fugue to prove it. Bach comes along and thinks it's really cute how everyone's been trying their best up until now. He writes something like 1,000 pieces per week. Seriously though, he wrote a cantata for every single Sunday church service. He also literally wrote the book on the art of the fugue. Bach ends up having a lot of kids. Half of them don't make it. The other half become composers. Now, why do we stand up for the Hallelujah chorus of Handel's Messiah? Legend has it that the king stood up at that exact moment. And of course, if the king stands up, everyone else has to. But that begs the question, why did the king stand up? Perhaps he was just so moved by the music, but let's be real. He was probably just sick of sitting for so long. I mean, seriously, the Messiah is like the 18th century version of the ring cycle. Then Bach dies, and everyone was like, okay, I guess we should start a new period of music now or something. We'll call this one the classical period, although future generations will probably mistake classical for anything written before 1950. The cool new style in France is the galant style. In fact, the word just meant anything cool or sophisticated. Man, music history is so gallant. Alexander Hamilton becomes the first American rapper. He drops this rap album featuring Aaron Burr and some of the other founding fathers. The mixtape was so good it was still winning Tony Awards in 2016. Let's check in on Germany where Sal Martini has a big announcement. Guys, I just invented this thing. I call it a symphony. So now everyone's writing all of these symphonies. Mozart wrote 41. Haydn wrote 104. Beethoven died after writing only 9.
Hamilton wrote the other 51.
Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven all go to school together in Vienna. Haydn invents the string quartet. Mozart was a prodigy who wrote his first symphony when he was only 8. He may have written Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, who knows? Beethoven pushed us towards the Romantic period by writing music that was increasingly emotional.
My emotions!
And then in 1827, Beethoven dies, so we had to start a new period of music. This period would prove to be the most romantic of all the periods. Schubert invites all of his friends over to show them the like 600 songs he's written. One of them's about a trout. He's basically the 19th century king of pop. He's even got cool hipster glasses. Berlioz writes a symphony which tells the story of a man who, after being spurned by the love of his life, takes opium and then hallucinates about murdering her, being executed, and then being tormented by witches at his funeral. It's still a better love story than Twilight. Franz Liszt creates the idea of a piano recital, and he has them all the time. He makes people be really quiet while they listen to him. He's super popular. Everyone loves him. He's basically a 19th century rock star. Music is getting longer and more complex now. It's almost like the tonal system is just eventually going to collapse. Also, music is happening on a much bigger scale. Mahler writes symphonies that require like 1,000 musicians, and his 6th symphony calls for like the hammer of Thor. Rossini writes the Barber of Seville, which is famous for Figaro's aria, which is not to be confused with the Marriage of Figaro, which was written by Mozart. In any case, Bugs Bunny would steal credit for both of them 150 years later. Verdi writes this really epic requiem, and he thinks to himself, this is going to go really great in all those Doritos commercials. There are these 5 big composers in Russia. Rimsky-Korsokov, who may have been an apiarist. No, I got that wrong. He wrote a piece about a bumblebee. That's it. Mussorgsky, who has a drinking problem. And those 3 other guys. Wagner is like, you know what would be really, really, really fun? A whole bunch of operas that last for days and days and days. The Ring Cycle, which includes the Ride of the Valkyries.
Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit.
No, not that one. The Ring Cycle lasts a grand total of 15 hours, which is even more than all 3 Lord of the Rings extended editions combined.
What can you say?
Speaking of Lord of the Rings, Wagner was the one who popularized the idea of a leitmotif, which is a musical theme which is associated with a character or an idea, which is heavily used by Howard Shore in Lord of the Rings. Strauss was asked to write the music for 2001: A Space Odyssey. He won the 1891 Oscar Award for Best Original Film Score. Let's take a quick look at Scandinavia. Jean Sibelius is by far the most Finlandian of all the composers to come from Finlandia. Edvard Grieg wrote the most popular music to come out of Norway until
What does the fuck say?
So Stephen Foster comes along and starts writing all of this American folk music and stuff. One of them is about Kentucky, which is cool because now Kentucky's sort of relevant. Okay, calm down, Kentucky. It was just one song. That's better. Since we're talking about America, Charles Ives plays the organ in 4 different keys at the same time, and people don't like it very much. So he quits music altogether to sell insurance. And film is now a thing, so we can write music for that too, and Satie is one of our first film composers. Satie also detested the sun, carried a hammer in his pocket for protection, and even started his own church, the Metropolitan Church of Art of Jesus the Conductor, of which he was the only member. He also owned over 100 umbrellas, 84 handkerchiefs, 13 identical suits, and only ate food that was white.
I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious.
Then Schoenberg gets really concerned about how music tends to favor one certain note over another, so he creates a democracy of pitch classes that equally use all 12 notes. He also emancipated the dissonance. Honestly, it all sounds like the musical equivalent of stepping on a cockroach. He was also afraid of the number 13, but ironically was born on September 13th and died on July 13th. Stravinsky writes this ballet called The Rite of Spring, and it premieres in Paris. Reports say that people rioted due to the unorthodox music and choreography. I personally think they rioted because they ran out of nachos at the concession stand. We have a world war, and everyone's like, that was cool, can we have another one? And German is like, yeah, sure, let's have another one. And music got really political there for a bit. Ravel wrote about his experiences in World War I.
These are my words, Mother. From Army.
Prokofiev writes this piece that's Russian propaganda against the Germans. Hitler decided he didn't like most of the music coming out of the German composers, and so he kicked most of them out. He let Karl Orff stay. Then the avant-gardes run away and lock themselves in their ivory tower, slamming the door behind them like some angsty teenager as they yell, "What do I care if you don't listen to my music?" They start doing all of this crazy stuff in the name of music. They start throwing trash can lids off the roofs of buildings. Sopranos are laughing and coughing and screaming on stage. On purpose. John Cage sits in silence to prove there's actually no such thing as silence. Also, this counts as a piece of music now. Then music splinters into a whole bunch of different genres. We've got rock, and jazz, and pop, and blues, and bluegrass, and folk, and Russolo with whatever weird contraption he's got here. Then musicals take New York by storm. Following in the steps of the German Singspiel, most musicals have spoken dialogue between their musical numbers. Musicals have taught us so much over the years, like how to spell Oklahoma, or what exactly is the model of a modern major general. And of course, Les Mis taught us that everyone in France speaks with a thick Cockney accent.
How do you do? My name's Davros.
John Williams most importantly wrote the Olympic theme song, but he also wrote some perfect film scores, and he won a Grammy to prove it. Then Eric Whitacre grew a perfect head of hair and wrote some perfect chords and won a Grammy to prove it. And then Pentatonic sang some perfect chords and won a Grammy to prove it. And I think that just about catches us up to now. I feel like I left something out.